Friday the 13th, Part 3 in Super 3D. The all-new process that puts you in the picture. Whether you want to be there or not. It will scare you. Count on it. Friday the 13th, Part 3 in Super 3D. Rated R.
Now playing in Sacramento. Check newspapers for theaters and showtime.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Pod and the Pendulum, your weekly horror movie podcast that delivers a deep dive into every single horror movie franchise on the planet, one movie in one episode at a time. I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and we're joined once again by our co-host, Jerry Smith.
How's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing today, Jerry?
I'm doing wonderful. Really excited about this episode.
What's that behind your head?
Behind my head?
On your head.
Oh, fuck. My goddamn video. My headphones broke and I borrowed my wife's. They're cats.
They're beautiful. I'm wearing pink headphones right now, so...
Just fucking embarrassed me, man.
No, I thought you had like an arrow through the head in celebration of Friday the 13th.
Ooh.
Yeah, so good. I am wearing...
I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna go with that one.
You and I are both comfortable in our masculinity to wear pink and cat headphones. There is no judgment here. So before we get going with our episode today, we actually have a few questions that I keep forgetting to cover in other episodes. Like, we always seem to run out of time. So let's take a quick dive into some of the questions we got. Are you ready for that?
Let's do it.
All right. So first, we had a question from username Safo Dravingo on Twitter. It's Jason Garcia. He had a question about the remake for Friday the 13th. He was wondering if the reason the 2009 remake was so poorly received was due to audiences' familiarity with the principal cast, that it hewed so closely to the source material, or maybe that it failed to bring anything new to the table, or was it maybe a combination of all those things?
See, I don't know how I feel about that, because, you know, there's definitely a good amount of naysayers when it comes to the remake, but it made a lot of money, and Derek Mears' Jason's pretty well received. I mean, it has its issues. Obviously, the kills aren't that memorable. You know, the characters aren't that likable, but I'm a huge fan of it, and I think a lot of people are. Like, I'm shocked by that.
Do you disagree with the hypothesis?
I disagree 100%, but I mean, then again, other people might not. I mean, I don't...
So,
is it that hated, really?
It's not necessarily that it was hated. It made pretty much all its money up front. It made it about all in the first weekend, and then it dropped like a stone after that. And it's been a decade, and you know, in part because of the lawsuit from 2013. But even after it came out in 2009, there didn't seem to be much of a rush to make a follow-up. And it kind of has lingered on a little bit. I
think a big reason for that is it's Michael Bay. I mean, he didn't like the movie. Like, he had a lot of issues with it after it came out. Like, oh, it has too much nudity, it has too much that. It's like, had he ever seen a fucking Friday the 13th movie before?
Probably not.
Like, I mean, it for me, it delivered. I mean, there's some issues here and there. Like I said, I don't like if you watch Friday the 13th Part 4 or 2 or 6 or a lot of them, and then you watch the remake. You know, the characters really aren't that likable, and your main protagonist is kind of whatever. But at the same time, like, man, I had fun with that movie.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I had fun with it too. I think that it was more an issue with remake fatigue by that point is in part of it. Maybe there were some fans that wanted Kane Hodder back, although I think Derek Mears is one of the best Jasons overall. And I would say, for me, it's always comes down to the casting. Like, it was a really unlikable cast overall.
Well, I mean, my couple nitpicks with it mostly have to do with Jason being turned into Rambo
Hmm.
and growing pot. I mean,
Yeah.
I never thought Jason would, smoke weed.
Well,
I
I
mean,
think
all power to him. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to deal with a lot of trauma of seeing your mom. Why not, light a joint? But
Yeah.
still,
I think Marcus Nispel's direction was like suited for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but not necessarily maybe a Friday the 13th type.
you know
of
what's
film.
funny? Like really quickly, I had a friend that worked for Crystal Lake Entertainment when they did that movie, and he has told me so many stories about Marcus Nispel on the set. Like he refused to shoot unless he had a specific color of shirt.
Mhm.
He clashed so much that a lot of the stuff was actually shot second unit because he was just hard to work with. I mean, that could be it.
Well, that could be a big part of it. I think that might be a big part of it. Let's see. Ask Josh 32, aka Fat Freddy, asks, where did Ted go in part 2?
I love these screen names.
Yeah. So I think Ted's still at the bar, isn't he?
Yeah, Ted's at the bar.
Yeah.
We talked about that the last episode, right?
A little bit.
Yeah, he's still in the bar. He's about to come out now, like
Mhm.
Decades later. Like
This
really
was your
old,
idea
really
for the
drunk.
remake. Yeah, this was
Yeah,
your idea
yeah.
for a follow-up.
Yeah, Ted's been in the bar since part 2, and he just comes out like now. Just comes out, like where's everyone?
If this was geared more towards the actor who played Ted, Stu Charnot,
Oh,
he had a small career in the 80s. He appeared in Christine, just one of the guys. He has some writing credits on Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm going to link to an interview he did with Modern Horrors where he basically said he's a writer and musician first, and he just really never wanted to be an actor. He kind of got pulled into it by an old girlfriend. So that's where he is at this point.
his girlfriend talked him into.
His girlfriend at the time was an agent and said you should,
Oh.
hear in this movie. All right. No question, just a comment from Jason hashtag Team Mothra, JR Wells 82. Mark's death is one that has always kind of bothered me. I think it's because of him going down the stairs afterwards. It just seems a bit cruel. I think it's one of the best deaths in the series, but yes, it's a really cruel death.
Mark in part 2 and Rob in part 4, I think, are the most heartbreaking deaths in the whole series. I mean, like we said in the last episode, Mark was such a good character, and they never used, like, he was in a wheelchair, but they never used that as a handicap in the film. You know what I mean? Like, he was. I've always appreciated part 2 for that fact that Mark character. I mean, that guy was the biggest chick magnet in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And like the fact that he's about to get laid, and then all of a sudden he gets like a machete to his face and he falls down those stairs. I mean, dude, I don't think that death scene has been topped in the series. I mean, maybe Jason goes to hell when the people are getting into it and the girl gets split in half.
Mm-hmm. Or the now I can't even think of it. The death in Jason X where the girl's face gets smashed.
Yeah, I like that one.
Great as well. All right, so we're going to save that last question since it pertains to part 3, and let's bring on our guest. Jerry, do you want to introduce our guest today? Thank you guys for waiting patiently, by the way.
Yeah, definitely. Today we have 2 guests, and we're very excited about it. First off, we have Joe Langford from BeHeroes.net and the podcast Appropriate. How's it going, Joe?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for coming. We're also joined by Jacob Davison of iHorror.com and many other things. What's up, man?
Happy to be here. Really excited to be a part of this episode.
All right.
We're thrilled to have you guys join us. So, guys, I always like to know before we dive into the movie itself, like when we're covering a series, what is it that has drawn you both to Friday the 13th? And in particular, when you saw what made you want to jump in for part 3?
In terms of Friday the 13th as a whole, I feel like it's because the franchise has become a part of American folklore. Like Jason is now basically the American boogeyman, amongst others, of course. But, it's just something distinctly national about the series, And as for part 3, I think it's a pretty fun entry, as we'll get into. And I actually had the fortune of seeing it in 3D last year in theaters, and it really made an impact on me.
How did the 3D impact it? I mean, obviously, it's not the modern 3D that we have now, which is kind of like a lot more, up to speed and looks very realistic. How was it seeing like a, close to 40-year-old movie in 3D, like a really campy film like this?
Well, it was a big crowd, so that was definitely a factor. Just all the oohs and ahs and laughter, and yeah, I mean, some of the bits are kind of hokey, like the stick toward the screen type of stuff. But again, a lot of the gore combined with the 3D adds a bit of fun to it.
Excellent. And how about yourself, Joe?
I've been a horror fan since I was a kid, and I think like part 2 is my favorite in the series, but part 3 was my favorite for a really long time, and actually was the first like rated R movie that I saw personally in a theater. When I was probably too young to see it, I guess, but it was the first like rated R movie that I saw in a theater, and it was in the 3D. And at the time was very cool. Like, I think I agree. It's a little cheesy right now. There's definitely a lot of cheese in that movie, I think, but there's some scenes in there that are some of my favorite from the entire series.
Okay. Now, did you sneak in to see it if it was your first R-rated, or did you have
No, it was the 80s. I mean, it was they took your money. They didn't want it.
They just didn't care.
Away from
that's what I was saying, I think, a couple episodes ago. I had some people on Twitter kind of mention, like, well, how did you see that movie at that age? Like, pre-Columbine, people really didn't card you that much. Like, when I was growing up, I saw like Halloween 5, Die Hard, Child's Play, Predator. I would watch anything that would come out that Friday as a kid. I mean, I was like 7, 8, 9 years old going to see all those movies. I saw Bram Stoker's Dracula after I got out, I think, of school in like 5th grade, maybe. And like, as long as like my grandma dropped me off or picked me up, they didn't care.
Right. I mean, prior to getting assigned seating in movies, you could, even if they wouldn't sell you a ticket, you're like, great, I'll buy a ticket for this PG movie, and then walk into an R-rated one.
Oh yeah.
I used to work for AMC, and I feel like kind of the big chain theaters were a factor in enforcement of ratings, because that was like a big policy we had to enforce, and I'm pretty sure the MPAA was pushing for more enforcement to keep the kids out of the R-rated movies.
Did you ever get to toss some like junior high kids up by the scruff of their neck for?
Well, not in the 80s comedy sense, but we did have to ask them to leave from time to time, yes.
Yeah. All right. So what are we...
Just, not to interrupt you, but not even just like the fact that a lot of us could get into movies like that. I feel like theaters in the 80s just didn't care in general. Like my stepdad took me opening night to see The Accused. And I think I was like 7, and there's no, like, I don't care if I'd get in trouble. Like, I would not let a 7-year-old into a movie about Jodie Foster getting gang raped. Like, I had no business seeing that movie.
Damn.
As a mental health counselor, I think that if that came up in session, my finger would be on the phone to, like, with Child Protective Services at that point. Like, I would be tempted to like start making that call to section.
Yeah.
Oh, I cannot tell you how many times I had to caution parents bring their kids to like specific R-rated movies that this might not be the best idea. I can't, like when Watchmen came out, so many people brought their kids to see it because of it. Oh, it's just a superhero movie. And then they'd walk out a little while later because there was a naked blue man in it.
They're like, why did I see that blue penis?
The two movies that jump out to me, I remember my wife and I caught a matinee of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 the day it opened up, and there was a kid who looked way too young to be there.
Oh.
And then when I was traveling on the road for work, I went to see another screening of Cabin in the Woods at like 10 o'clock at night on a school night. And there was like this 5-year-old girl there just yelling, "I don't want to be here," before the movie even started. And we're like, well, nobody wants you here either, little girl.
Yeah.
We're right there.
You don't understand the genius of Cabin in the Woods, little kid. Get out. Get out.
Get the hell out of here.
There's a huge difference between having like a kid who gravitates toward scary stuff like as a child and pouring it on their little brain like against their will. It's terrible.
I have to dial it down with my kids.
Yeah.
Like, I think my son asked me a couple months ago, like, Dad, what is this movie Martyrs? Can I watch this? No.
No,
Not.
Oh boy.
no. We've done, my daughter's 8 and she's done a few of the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Streets. She snuck down one night when she was supposed to be in bed and like right when I started The Thing. And I'm like, I'm not getting up out of this beanbag, kid. If this gives you nightmares, that's on you. And she loved every minute of it. But like there's Martyrs would be a no-go. Anything Rob Zombie would be a no-go right now. We're doing the Austin Power movies, and it's definitely made for some uncomfortable conversations right now. But we're not shying away from them. But there's definitely, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot this is a little bit racier than I remember from 20 years ago.
Like, speaking on Rob Zombie, like my kids love his music, which even that I have to be like, like. My kid, like my daughter, walked around like the house a couple months ago, like yelling "Get High" from one of his songs. Like, okay, we're not listening to that anymore. But like ever since they found out that my son's super into the Halloween series, and he's like, "Wait, Rob Zombie did 2 of those? Can I watch those?" Hell no.
No,
we don't even want to watch those. But
so what do we hear now that we have gone so far off the rails? It's great.
So Friday the 13th Part 3.
What are we here to talk about tonight, gentlemen?
Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D.
In 3D. The terror is coming at you in all dimensions. The 1982 slasher film. And to me, I think the most important thing about this movie and its biggest legacy is it's the movie where Jason actually becomes Jason. It's the one where he gets the hockey mask and he gets that outfit, which I really associate with him, which is like not just the hockey mask, but like the blue work shirt. I think is almost just as much of a part of the character overall. It's where we first see that look overall. And I kind of made a note here. I identified the energy that Richard Brooker, who played Jason in this movie, is the dad that's been told to take out the trash or mow the lawn. All he wants to do is like sit on the couch and drink beer and watch football, but he knows that like arguing's futile. Like it's not going to help. So he's not even mad about it. He's just like, all of his actions, it's kind of, he kills somebody and then just like saunters kind of off the screen like, yep, another thing to take off.
It's kind of like Homer Simpson in Part 3. Like, whereas Part 2, Jason was like really angry and really scared at times, like there's that fear in him and he's falling off of chairs and he's clumsy. In Part 3, he just looks like he's super annoyed in general. Like,
he's gone from defending the turf to being like, these fucking kids on my fucking lawn again.
Yeah, exactly. And then but Part 3, I think, is so important to the series. I mean, it's probably one of my least favorite of the first few, but I definitely recognize how important it was. Because, I mean, he could have had any other mask, and we would have, Jason wearing, like a nun mask or something. Anything. And, I mean, we got that hockey mask, and it's so iconic that you just have to appreciate it.
Yeah. And it is interesting because it's the middle movie of the well, I guess in the timeline, it's like 2, 3, and 4 take place within like a week or a weekend.
Yeah.
So this is the second act of that little mini trilogy in the franchise.
I love that about those 3 movies too. Like those out of the series are definitely connected. I mean, even not going too in detail into 4 because that's a different episode, but I loved how Rob's character in 4 is the brother of Sandra in 2, and he's looking for her. So it kind of has that continuity. So Marvel MCU suck it.
Right. It's a weird.
It's always bothered me in terms of just Jason's look in general. Like Part 2 happened, and then like the next day he's a head and a half taller and gained 80 pounds and lost all his hair. And
because that's the thing. In 3, like he's got real bulk to him. Like he's just a like he's very ogreish.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what's go ahead.
Just lumbering. He's kind of more sort of Frankenstein-y, where it's like he was a little more wily and jumping around, and
Right.
I never understood why they made that choice in terms of.
Well, what's interesting is I could understand, different filmmakers kind of want their own stamp on it, but Steve Miner did 2 and 3. So I've always wondered, like, why not just stick to like what you were comfortable with in the second one,
Or if you're really itchy to make a change, just do another, 5 years ago, this thing
Right.
happened down the road.
Yeah.
Just and do a time jump. Like if you're
Maybe
gonna
he just went to
purpose make it the
Supercut
next
chapter
day,
2.
then-
And it's tough to make sense of the timeline as well in 2, 3, and 4, because it does take place over such a short period of time. Like they all lead right into one another, and you have, like you mentioned, the character Paul in part 4 who's looking for his sister, but she would have only been gone like one day at that point, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So-
No. Yeah. When Rob's looking for her, it's not long at all.
And
But he
Jason's
looks like he looks like he's been hunting Jason for like years. I mean, he has like newspaper clippings. Like, who took those pictures of Jason in the lift?
if
you
he
know,
was
like-
like
Although-
Annie's brother or Alice's brother from part 1, that would have made more sense.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
the concept is cool.
Although I figure, if you hear about Jason going hog wild in Crystal Lake and you happen to have a family around there and you don't hear back from them soon, you probably are going to assume the worst.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, Clay in the remake. I mean, he at least had his little motorcycle, so if things didn't work out, he could just go on like a road
Mhm.
trip if he doesn't find his sister. But I mean,
Right.
Rob's just, like, he has his backpack. He looks like he went to Dick's Sporting Goods and just like spent a lot of money preparing to go look for his sister who's been gone for maybe a day or two.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
it's interesting, but I love the series for those little quirks.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's part of why we love this series. Like, no one's watching these for like the really tightly scripted story. It's not Barry on HBO or
Well, you know what's
Breaking
funny?
Bad.
I don't know if you guys have heard it, but there's a really good fan commentary on the DVD of Friday the 13th Part 4 with Adam Green and Joe Lynch doing it.
Yeah, I've listened to that.
Oh God, it's one of my favorite commentaries in the world because
Mhm.
they know the little faults in the movies, but they're such fans like we are that, like, I mean, they make jokes, that like P.T. Anderson was influenced by some of the shots in Friday the 13th.
Yeah, and that, actually, something they pointed out that I kind of noticed in part 3 as well is that, they talk about kind of the shots of the location, the shots on Crystal Lake, and how
Mhm.
some of those shots of, just nature or the lake itself can be some of the most haunting in the entire series. Like, because like I just rewatched part 3, and like those shots of the lake, just fill you with a sense of dread.
Mhm.
Oh, definitely. I agree 100%, especially having seen like 2 films prior, and then you see a lot of the cinematography in 3. Like it's really it has a really good knack for getting under your skin.
I've always liked the set pieces too, like that, just that whole like little kind of the house and the barn. Like, I always felt like I knew the layout and had a relationship with it, and it just had a sort of isolated, kind of a creepy vibe to it
Yeah.
that I enjoyed.
That's what I
barn-
love about the series is that anyone who has been to camp or anything like that, it instantly like triggers stuff for you. Like I went to YMCA camp and I remember it being like the most frightening thing in the world because I was already such a Friday the 13th fan. And it was supposed to be like a week and a half. And I think that I called my mom crying like the same night I arrived. She came and picked me up. Yeah, but like the locations are great.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like I did summer camp in New Hampshire for several years, and there is something, like you grow up in a town or the city, and then you spend a big chunk of time in nature, especially as a kid. Like it just feels so different, and like, and that's the other thing too. Like I feel like every camp kind of has their own boogeyman or campfire story. And so this is just kind of Friday the 13th was the logical conclusion, after all these years, like, kind of, like with the whole Cropsey thing, but, just building an entire franchise story around, this campfire story that's now like one of the biggest horror movies of all time.
I think that's why I really appreciate both the Friday the 13th and Halloween franchises kind of equally. They're both 2 very important franchises to me. It's because all of us have had a babysitter or been a babysitter at some point. So the Halloween series, before it gets really weird and culty and really bad, I mean, there is that kind of grounded in reality thing, like, babysitting kids, somebody stalking you. That's terrifying to me. Or, who hasn't been to like a summer camp or something like that? And I feel like that's where both series really, they're both successful with horror fans, because they kind of identify to all of us, because we've all done that at some point of our life.
Well, I like that as a kid too. Like even as a grown up now, like I'm a city boy, but when I am camping or when I am out in the woods, there's always sort of that isolated kind of creepy vibe that I'm sure came from the Friday the 13th movies. But then Halloween came, and that felt like a kind of a game changer to me, because like that could be happening right next door. Mm-hmm. And there's still the time, Halloween definitely feels creepier, but that was just, I loved that as a kid. Like Halloween could be happening right now next door. Friday the 13th.
Probably is. It probably is. You should check it.
Growing up, like we lived, like our house, basically, like you would walk out of our front door, turn left, and walk straight into this massive forest, with some trails, but a lot of off trails. And we spent, when I say we, my friends and I would spend like our summers like building forts in the woods, like building tree houses, kind of like playing war games in the woods. And I can tell you that like it would get scary. Like you would hear a tree snap, you would hear a tree branch break from far away, or hear some animal sound you weren't familiar with. And, as a little kid, your mind would go to so many different places of like horrible ways you're going to die in that moment, in part because of movies like Friday the 13th. You're like, oh man, there's like Jason or some sort of Jason like creature that's out here that's going to like stab me to death. And you could really freak yourself out.
It's not your territory. That's someone else's territory. You're just in it.
These movies become kind of our modern folklore, our modern kind of, in some ways, Grimm's fairy tales initially were very dark. They did not have happy endings. And your movies like Halloween, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Streets become folklore for just a much different generation, kind of through a different storytelling medium at that point.
What's interesting, a really quick story, because I think it's a good one. As a kid, I had to step back from the Friday the 13th series for a while, because my family did a family reunion out in the woods. I can't remember where it was, somewhere here in California. And there were all these cabins, and they were all named after different like Western characters, like Gunsmoke and all this stuff. And so we all met, the entire Smith family met this kind of campground, had all these cabins, and at night all of us kids had a campfire, and we were sitting around trying to scare each other, and everyone was trying to come up with the scariest stories. And me, I think I just pulled the plot of Friday the 13th movies, passing them off like I came up with them. And everyone was scared, and I thought like I was a badass. But then like I looked out into the woods past the heads of like my cousins, looked out into the woods, and there was a figure standing there wearing a black cloak. Like, I shit you not. And like maybe 200-300 feet away, just staring. And I didn't even like, when you get so afraid that you can't even like talk. Like I just stood up. I just stood up and walked back to the cabin and just ditched all my cousins. And I just stayed there in bed for like all night. Cause like, and I still, like, I'm 38 now, and I still, at least once or twice a week, wonder what that person was, or wonder what. Come to find out, like, I guess there was, like, a cult nearby there that was actually documented, and I'll look it up. Maybe we could, like, link it.
Please do.
But, yeah, there was a cult, and that person was just, like, staring at me. And so for a long time, I had to just take a break from any camp-related stuff because it just scared the shit out of me.
Understandably so. Funnily enough, my sister just got married last year, and she decided to have the wedding at a summer camp that my mom used to go to in Connecticut, and I, of course, I couldn't resist. I brought my Friday the 13th hoodie to the wedding, and like because we were there for the weekend, so like we'd be hanging out in between, like make campfire and stuff, and like I was wearing that, and like some of my sister's friends are like, "Oh, dude, you're gonna jinx it! Like Jason's gonna get us or something because you're wearing that." So just kind of tempting fate on that, I guess.
Mhm.
That's when the horde nerd and all of us, like push up our glasses and be like, well, Jason is not from here. Talk about the geography of the series. He would never come here because he only takes taxis at the beginning of part 2.
I always pictured him on Greyhound, just riding the bus.
Hitchhiking.
Well, there was that incident. Like, I'm not trying to like poke fun at real true crime, but there was that incident like a few years ago, that Greyhound, where that dude just like went nuts and cut that dude's head off.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I guess
Craziness.
Jason.
Yeah.
I guess Jason.
If they do another Friday the 13th movie soon, maybe Jason can lift around.
Yeah. Uber Jason. Whoa.
Uber Jason takes an Uber.
Yeah. All right.
Oh.
So Friday the 13th part 3.
Yeah. So, what do we think of the feel of this movie overall?
Huh?
Joe, you mentioned you really like some of the set pieces. I think the barn in particular, but there's always been something about this movie, like especially if I watch it back to back, say with part 2, that always has felt a little bit off in terms of the look of the movie overall. And I think that is in part because of the change in location from like New Jersey to bringing it to California, so that Frank Mancuso Jr. could have more kind of oversight of the movie, especially as they kind of moved into 3D.
Well, what's interesting is I think any franchise that makes those moves, it becomes kind of obvious. Like Texas Chainsaw stopped feeling like a Texas Chainsaw movie from part 3 on, because they started filming it in California. Whereas the first 2 films in that series, you could feel the heat, especially the first one.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's miserable. I'm miserable watching the first movie. I love it, but
I remember, sorry, as a kid, that there was a change in vibe that I think was subtle, but I think did make a difference. That I remember noticing, like, oh, it was the first Friday the 13th where it didn't rain. There was like a kind of a windstorm, but it wasn't raining like it was in the first 2, and that felt very different to me.
Interesting.
And for me, like it did seem like the environment was a bit more lush, because like I feel like in part 2, well, let's see, like part 1 and part 2 like may have been a bit closer to winter or fall, so it was easier to tell, like the leaves were falling off and like there was more, just sticks and brush. But in part 3, it's a pretty lush forest, and the lake looks beautiful, and yeah, there it does look more vibrant, I guess.
We talked in the previous episode about how part 2, as great as it is, was still the filmmakers trying to figure out what they wanted to do with Jason and so on. And I feel like from 3 on, they kind of knew what they were doing, but there's still a couple missteps. Like to this day, my biggest fundamental issue with 3 is the insinuation that Jason maybe tried to rape the main protagonist at some point.
Oh yeah.
It had been raining and the woods were cold and wet, but I found a dry spot under an old oak tree. I guess I fell asleep. All I can remember next is being startled out of sleep by the sound of footsteps. I was sure it was Dad, so I just sat up and I listened for him. But the footsteps stopped. Then there was this cracking noise behind me. I turned around, and standing there was this hideous-looking man. He was so grotesque, he was almost inhuman. He had a knife, and he attacked me with it. I was so hysterical, I don't know how I was even able to think, but I kicked the knife out of his hands and I ran. But he ran after me and he caught me and he pulled me down on the ground. I was kicking and screaming and yelling, but it didn't do any good. He dragged me along the ground. I blacked out. I don't know what happened after that. I just don't know.
Yeah,
Like
that whole
that
thing was weird.
it never felt right to me. I mean, obviously, rape never feels right to me. I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's off. Like, I don't get it. It doesn't line up with the character whatsoever. I mean, if anything,
Or the
Jason's kind of
story.
motivated by hate
Right.
for like sex. You know, like
Yeah.
most of the deaths when it comes to like sexual stuff, he kind of gets this enjoyment of like, oh, you guys are screwing. Check this out. You're dead. Like
Right.
he doesn't come off like Freddy. I wouldn't put it past Freddy because obviously he was, you know, a sexual
Baked into the
deviant.
character.
Exactly. Jason, it's just I don't know. That whole monologue just really takes me out of the movie.
It's-
That whole thing could have been taken
Yeah.
out, I think, especially because it's a flashback. And so, 2 years ago, I think he looked like Jason in part 3, and then he lost a bunch of weight and grew his hair out and put it back on his head, and then went back. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And it's weird, like you compare that, say, with the scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 when Leatherface confronts Stretch at the radio station, and that chainsaw is, you know, obviously a metaphor for his penis, and he's having his first kind of sexual experience at that point, and it fits that character, and it kind of fits the mindset of Leatherface, where he had all these kind of like different weird and tweaked personas, and you could just see that because he just has this. I always felt Leatherface had a fundamentally odd and misunderstanding of the world around him, where I never felt like that with Jason. Like Jason kind of had like this set purpose, like I'm out to avenge my mother from these fucking kids that have killed her, and you know, basically my purpose is going to be for now and forever to avenge my mother's death. And she taught me from an early age that, you know, these kids are engaging in things they shouldn't be doing, and it's bad and it's wrong. And for him to kind of have like that sexual urge, even in that just one moment, it just feels like really out of character for it. And it just also doesn't make sense that he would leave someone alive. Like the scene just kind of ends. She's just like, I passed out and then I woke up in my room and it's been 2 years. And it's like, it's bad storytelling.
Yeah.
There's no other incident where he did that, left somebody alive. Like, why would he do that then?
Yeah, that whole thing was kind of confusing too. I mean, like, how did she end up back in her room? And also, like, you know, like it seemed like, you know, with the whole Jason stuff, like they should have checked into that.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. Like Jason's whole thing is repression. Like his mother was very overbearing and restrictive, so you know he's so like he sees the kids doing something naughty, he responds by killing them.
Mhm.
Which is the other thing too, that I feel like this is when that kind of thing was really hitting its stride in terms of Jason's traits in the franchise. Like if the kids are misbehaving, Jason's gonna get him with the machete. Like he kills the couples while having sex, and he kills the stoners, and he kills the bikers who were delinquents. So yeah, you know, just like Jason's kind of you know, just not just repression himself, but he's like his solution to repressing others is killing them.
Right.
Well, do you guys think at all that maybe that when the series started kind of adhering to those kind of rules, that maybe it suffered and lost some of its actual like terrifying traits? I mean, the second one to me, the second film I think is the scariest as far as just my personal preference, because you don't really know what you're getting, you know? Like you have this person killing someone for really no reason other than we end up finding out, you know, it's Jason and so on. So we know why he's doing it. But for the most part, you know, he's trying to kill everyone. Whereas in the other films, like you said, you know, these people are having sex, you got to go. You're smoking weed, you got to go. That kind of thing. Like, I feel like that takes some of the mystery out, kind of like in the Halloween series. Once they do the stupid sister twist, it's like, whatever. Then they do a senior citizen cult is leading Michael Myers. Like, it takes all the fear and the mystery out of a character that should have no explanation whatsoever. I don't want to know that Michael Myers is a long-haired Kiss fan who's killing his family because he didn't go trick-or-treating,
right?
You know, or that his mom's a stripper. I just want him to be this faceless nothing, and kind of like Jason. The thing about his mom, I think that's good motivation, but when you get into a set form of rules, and I think that's kind of why I'm not super big into the Scream series. I don't want rules, you know. I want kind of this anarchy of a character of like, you don't know what you're getting, and I think that's more terrifying. Do you guys feel like maybe that kind of took away the fright of it?
Well, I think the issue is that they leaned a bit too heavily into it,
Mhm.
which also hurt, just kind of the characters in the franchise. Because, it came to a point later in the series that, the characters were just caricatures and not actually felt like people, as opposed to, the earlier movies where, they not necessarily had depth, but, they weren't, just one dimensional.
Well, even the character of Ginny in the second one, I mean, that she's having sex. Like,
Right.
she's pretty confident in who she is.
So is Alice.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So I kind of like the fact that it didn't rely on those like, oh, it's the survivor girl who's never been laid. Like, you know what? Like, girls like to have sex just as much as guys. Like I that's one thing about like kind of horror tropes that drive me nuts sometimes. Like, I want my characters realistic, and I think that's why the final chapter is my favorite Friday the 13th movie, and I've said that for years. Just because, I mean, I'll probably end up saying this once every episode, so I'm sorry, Mike.
That's all right.
If you take Jason out of the final chapter, you have a badass coming of age movie. I mean, it's like Last American Virgin up in there,
Right.
like literally, Lawrence Monason. But I mean, those characters are so likable because they're so unique and they're so relatable. Same with part 2. Like, I was all these characters growing up, like, and when it gets later into the series of Friday the 13th and all the other series of franchises, like, I feel like it kind of loses that genius of identifying with these characters, like, it becomes more about, oh, here's Jason, I'm excited to see who he's going to kill and how he's going to kill them, and less about the story.
Right.
Oh, for sure. I think that's really happened. It's all just, what is Jason going to do and how is he going to do it, rather than who he's doing it to. And that's, I think it kind of went when it started to go off rails after the final chapter for me.
What it does too is when it starts becoming that formula that you engage in this act that you're not supposed to, and now you're killed, is they also shot it differently where you remove yourself from the killer's point of view. Up to this point, it had really been a lot of stalking, a lot of tension, a lot of buildup. There's like the scene in part 2 where a character goes to, out to the to change her panties, and then like the camera like loses track of her for a minute, stays in that area, and then finds her again. And it disorients the audience. It makes for a lot more tension. Now you get into much more of a formula where, okay, couple has sex, Jason appears for like 5 seconds on screen, couple is killed, the kill is like hacked to pieces by the MPAA, so you barely know what happened, and you move on to your next set piece.
Well,
so
what's interesting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's good.
What's interesting to me, again, to make the same point, is Steve Miner did 2 and 3, and it's such a different style in 3 that I feel like 100%, maybe 95% of the focus was just on getting the 3D shots right.
Yeah.
To where like they were more focused with like, oh, let's put the stick in your eye, let's hold this snake or this eyeball, and it's just like, they even say that in Crystal Lake Memories, that book, that like all the actors basically said, like, well, we didn't get motivation, we didn't get anything, he just told us to hit the mark right for the 3D.
Right.
And I think it shows.
Using the yo-yo.
Yeah.
The apples.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, no, you keep going.
No, I was just gonna say that, I mean, it shows in that movie, and I'm not trying to just trash it, because I'm pretty fond of 3, but I mean, the issues I have with it are just issues that I think could have been fixed very easily. Like, yeah, I understand 3D was huge around then. You got like Friday the 13th Part 3. You have Jaws 3D.
Poltergeist 3D.
Poltergeist 3D. You're right. I think Amityville. Right?
Or Amityville 3D.
Yeah.
Amityville 3D, I meant. My bad.
Yeah, wait, yeah. Well, Poltergeist 3D would be great, though.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Right? But I feel like when the gimmick kind of surpasses the execution, I feel like that's when the films suffer. And I feel like Friday the 13th has like moments of brilliance, but I think it's kind of outweighed at times with like kind of like head scratching moments of like, I get it, 3D's cool, but I don't give a shit about that broom.
Yeah.
Like,
This
On
is the
that-
first movie where I don't think you get those, aside from Shelley, I don't think you really get any characters that are that distinguishable from one another. I have a very hard time telling Vera and Chris apart from one another in this movie. Like, even on like a dozenth rewatch, I'm like, I still get them mixed up all the time.
Well, I feel like Shelley is the only character that I actually actively remember.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've seen 3 so many times. I watched it last night, and I'm still trying to like think of, okay, well, there's Shelley and there's Jason, and there's the people that fill the whole almost 20 minutes of the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a little bit.
And there's like the Big Lots or Walmart version of Cheech and Chong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's such a weird movie.
Although I did like the bikers, like I thought that was an interesting inclusion, you know, because it's also because like not too many other Friday 13 movies have kind of human antagonists, I guess. I mean, I don't think they kill Shelley. I think they just kind of wanted to beat him up again. But I mean, it is interesting because also they do give, well, at least that one guy, I think his name is Ali. Like, he gives Jason a bit of a fight, and then he does that pop up at the end again. So I thought that did kind of stir things up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Fox is the most memorable character for me. Like, she was badass. She was badass for sure.
And she's just so happy on that swing.
Yeah.
The joy she gets in that moment.
It's like, that's like when you see like these hardcore like gangster dudes like show like their humanity for a second. Like, I was filming a short film a few years ago, and we were so stressed out. We were filming on a block, and then there was like this scary looking like I hate to use the word cholo, but I mean that's what I grew up, you know, saying. But I mentioned that on Twitter about a month ago, and someone basically said I was the devil and I was stereotyping people. But there was this hardcore gangster dude that was just like out of nowhere cruised by us while we were filming, and he was on like a little scooter, and like it was like seeing like someone really tough do something like really not tough, but they were having fun. He was so stoked being on the scooter. And I feel like that's what Fox is doing in part 3. Like, she's a badass, but she just wants to swing. But the scene that makes me laugh every time is, because it's just so mean-spirited, is the little, like, gas station convenience store part.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The attendant is so mean. Like, well, we don't take food stamps here. It's like, fuck, dude. Jesus.
Terrible.
And something funny I noticed about the movie, seeing it in theaters, is like there are 2 different instances of somebody using the bathroom and not wiping.
Oh man, the things you notice.
Like the dude at the convenience store at the beginning, and the stoner guy. I think his name is Chuck.
Yeah.
They both go to the bathroom, but they don't wash their hands.
Aren't most stoners named Chuck though?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, it was just an odd detail that they're like in this one movie there are 2 different instances focus of a character using a bathroom not washing their hands
or wiping.
You guys
they added in a little fart noise too at the beginning of the movie when I'm trying to think here, when Harold gets off of the toilet and moves away from it. Like, they actually added a little, because I remember reading in Crystal Lake Memories, the actor Steve Susskind was like, I did not know they were going to do that. That was a bullshit move right there.
Oh god,
he was not happy about that.
Harold
when
is
they do those
the worst.
things when they do those things in movies, like people don't wash their hands, does it drive you guys as crazy as it does for me? Like,
Yes.
oh yeah.
I remember when I watched Dead Snow for the first time, and that dude has sex while he's taking a dump in the outhouse, and like to this day I have never felt more uncomfortable in a movie. Just like, I don't want to associate those 2 things.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's a particular fetish that people are into, like not me. Keep those things separated.
I'm not going to kink shame here, but
opening scene with Harold just like makes me insane. I can hardly watch it. I always fast forward.
Yeah, that's an odd. I actually made a quick note here. Like, the movie spends the first 17 minutes
Yeah, it's a long.
out of a movie that's barely 90 minutes long on Harold and Edna, these two kind of middle-aged characters that can't stand one another. And it's kind of a redo of the Halloween 2 opening scene, just not done as well. But it's it's 17 minutes before you get to any of the teen characters in this movie. And I don't quite know why that is. Now is it a rabbit that Harold's holding in the little pet store they own?
Yeah, and he's got like a goldfish.
Yeah. I do like that, like, Harold loves his little pets, and he kind of adds a little quirk to it. But, like, why? Like, why do we spend so much time here with them? Like, I think you'd have taken that time and gotten to know the teen characters a little bit better before you dispose of them.
That taking your time to have such a long opening doesn't work for Friday the 13th 3. But I feel like they did it so well in the remake. Like, that opening is close to 20 minutes long before the credits roll. And I think if there's any issue with the remake, it's the fact that the rest of the film isn't as strong as that amazing opening. Like, fuck, man, that beginning is insane. Whereas this one is just like, you're checking your watch. It's like, really? Has it been 17 minutes of watching this bickering couple? Like, this is my first marriage. I don't want to relive that.
Right. We did get a question about Harold.
Really?
So now that we have everybody on, and it's about part 3, let's do it. So our friends over at the Kill by Kill Pod, who they've did like basically 60 episodes on Friday the 13th, and now we're doing the Nightmare on Elm Street series. They're all smaller chunks, and they're all like their deal is they just basically break down all the characters. It's a really fun podcast. I highly recommend it. So they had a question: why does Harold take a poop in his business's storage room, and why hasn't the Crystal Lake Health Department shut down that store yet? Two very good questions.
That is the worst and best questions I've ever heard. Because only horror nerds like us would actually think about that stuff. Oh my gosh, that is great.
And also, like, would having all those pets in that like store or the grocery, be a violation too? Because he's just kind of have them all around.
Right.
Yeah, crawling around on the produce.
I feel like OSHA and every other place would just have a field day with this. But do you think that that's why maybe they're still open? Is because nobody fucks around with Crystal Lake? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if I was like the inspector, I would say, like, I would check it on my like little check off list. I'd be like, yeah, I checked it. I checked it.
It gets a pass.
Yeah,
I have an answer to the pooping question, though. I always have an answer to poop.
Jason goes to hell when she keeps poking the hockey masks into the burger with her finger. Like, I don't want to fucking eat your burger that you've had your finger in. Get out of here with that.
Yeah, which also makes me think, like, what is the layout or economy of Crystal Lake like? Considering so many people have gotten murdered there over the years. Right? Like, what do they have? Do they have a Starbucks now?
I feel like it would become like in Blair Witch Project, Book of Shadows, where eventually it would just have its own kind of cottage tourism industry where people would kind of go and tour the woods and then never come back from it. And then you would just pick up the bodies and, commit credit card fraud and start, just like charging things on the dead people's cards because they're no longer around to dispute it.
Just like that was be gently bullied by roving bands of weirdly multicultural biker gangs.
Yeah.
I think Fox and the other bikers kind of had that on lock, just like picking up the bodies for Jason and, taking the credit cards and stuff. Not the food stamps because they don't accept those.
Right. They were very clear on that. So I think Harold used the storage room to poop because he just wanted to get away from Edna. Like, that was a toxic relationship. I felt very bad for both of those characters.
They need to get out of that marriage.
Yeah, that just wasn't
good. Maybe the actual bathroom was near where she was, and he just didn't want to deal with that, so he decided to just use the storeroom.
He just wanted his alone time. That's all.
About the smell, and he doesn't spray enough.
Looking at Harold, he does look like the kind of guy that drops some pretty stinky craps. So
oh God!
Added in.
People listening to this episode
what is wrong with these people? Yeah, we're a silly bunch. That's all right.
But on another subject, I wanted to ask you guys, because, it's such a central part of the movie, like, what did you actually think of the 3D if you've had the chance to see it in 3D?
See, I haven't. I've only
never
seen it
in 3D.
I've only seen it with those really awful glasses that came with the DVD, to where like it just looks like, it looks bad. I would love to see the movie in 3D because I feel like I would appreciate it more. Like,
Did it
man,
add-
like,
So I think that by today's standards, that the 3D is pretty shoddy.
Mhm.
But I remember seeing it as a kid in 3D and thinking it was actually really cool. I mean, again, I was pretty young, but also it was new. You know what I mean? As a phenomenon then, and I just remember thinking like the eyeball scene.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Really cool in 3D. Yeah, and there was a couple of the when he shoots the spear at
Spear
Vera's-
gun.
Yeah, the spear gun. Like that was really cool in 3D. Like there was some really cool things to be able to see it sort of young and new like that. But by today's standards, I think that the 3D. I haven't seen it in 3D for a while, but I think by today's standards, it would be pretty cheesy.
So, Jacob, when you saw this, what do you think the 3D added to the experience? Like, how did you feel it was a better experience seeing it in 3D over just like a standard screening of it on a Friday night?
Well, I think it's a couple factors. For one, it was sold out crowd, or big crowd there. So just seeing it with an audience and getting everybody's reactions definitely added to the experience. And yeah, I mean it's a gimmick, but it is a fun gimmick.
Okay.
Mike, like Mike was saying, just the kills were more. Oh god, I'm gonna say it. They were more eye popping. Yeah, come on, I couldn't resist. But yeah, no, it was fun. They definitely added to the kill scenes, and I mean, and in its own kind of campy way, the more egregious additions of 3D scenes, like when they're juggling the apples, or when Harold's pointing the rake at the screen, it's like it's got its charm. It's like how in House of Wax they have that long scene of the dude just playing with a paddle ball, just to be like, hey, look, it's 3D. So
what's funny is I don't know if you guys know him, but Rob Galuzzo, Rob G. Anytime that you go to his house, the first thing he does is he does a 3D demonstration, and it's one of the coolest things. He'll take like 5 or 6 different movies, and he has like the full 3D setup in his house, and it's amazing. And like he'll play like that scene from House of Wax. He'll play, the T-Rex escaping in Jurassic Park, all this stuff, and it feels. I've always respected him for that. He's such a lover of all things 3D that like it's awesome. It's awesome to come across someone with such a passion for that kind of stuff. I almost went to that same Friday the 13th 3 screening, but I can't remember why I couldn't make it. But man, I think it would be so cool to see that movie.
Me too.
Yeah, like I said, the crowd really added to the experience combined with the 3D, because we got audible reactions. Eyeball pops out, everybody's like, oh, and and there were some some screams, like some people responded to the scares, like the bisected body in the alcove, like that. That was actually a pretty good reveal.
That's cool.
Well, and I think that's one of the things with Friday the 13th, with part 3 specifically. I think it's when it kind of hit its stride. It figured out really what it wanted to do. It had the hockey mask, and it kind of set the tone for the rest of the series. And I think it became less scary. Like I don't remember after final chapter probably being scared so much in Friday the 13th. It's just having fun. There was a couple of the Friday the 13th movies that were some of the most fun I had in a theater. Part 6, with the gun thing, like that was a blast. There was like people were throwing food in the theater. It was like clapping and cheering. It was really, there was some fun experiences in the theater watching Friday the 13th movies.
That's the thing. That's the thing with the Friday the 13th series in particular. Like, I've never been really frightened by them, other than maybe like part 2. But they're so much fun. And you know, I've been poking fun at part 3 nonstop, but I'm really fond of it. It's a lot of fun, you know, and everyone likes to hate on Shelley. I love that character.
Yeah.
Like, I love that character. My wife, when we met, when we started dating, she was kind of embarrassed to tell me, like, you know, I know that you write about horror for a living, so I'm kind of embarrassed to say I've only seen the first out of all of those series.
Mhm.
What? So it was fun to like go through every series and have her watch the entire, you know, franchises. And 3 is her favorite out of the entire series. Like, she is so into Friday the 13th Part 3, and it's cool because it makes me kind of reevaluate things too, like kind of appreciate things differently. But I think Shelley always gets lumped in with Franklin from Texas Chainsaw, and I'm not having that.
Unfair. No,
It's
'cause
very
Yeah.
Franklin is out and out one of the most annoying characters in movie, not just horror movie, but movie history. I can't wait till we eventually get. Well, I can wait till we eventually get to Texas Chainsaw because everything after part 3 is such a clusterfuck. But like, I can't wait to tell my Franklin stories about just like watching that movie with friends and cheering him getting killed.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing, because Shelley, they're always lumped together, but Shelley is a good character.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's trying to make friends. He's trying his hardest to, you know, impress them, make them laugh. It just, like my humor, it just bombs 90% of the time.
Yeah, no, like I was rewatching last night, and I feel like there's a lot to sympathize with Shelley. Like,
Mhm.
just that one scene after the fake scare where, you know, he scares I think it was Vera,
Mhm.
with, you know, when he's in the lake, and then he's like, and she rails at him about scaring her, and he's just like, this is just how I know this is how I know to make friends, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And you know, just because that's the thing, yeah, he's very genuine. Like, you know, there's a lot of heart to him, and
There's
That, and like
when
when
he-
you first meet him, and like, you know, they introduced his kind of like blind date to him. Like,
Yeah.
she's so blatantly rude to him that
He
you're just
apologizes
like, shit.
to her. He apologizes to. He lifts up his mask and he's like, "Sorry," you know. And it's
Yeah,
like,
it's just
oh, your
like,
heart breaks. It's like that
yeah.
moment in The Simpsons when Lisa rejects Ralph and Bart's
Yeah.
like, "You can pause the screen. You can pause it and see right here is when his heart absolutely breaks into shreds." It's just so sad to see that, because that's part of the reason I love Shelley.
Yeah.
It's more than just he's the character that Jason gets the mask from. It's like, it's one of the few characters in this movie. Like, other than that and like the 3 bikers, like, I don't really remember. Like, it's, you know, I know Amy Steele was asked to come back for part 3 and she rejected the role. She said there wasn't really a script yet, but she wasn't feeling it either way, and she's like, she said she regrets it now. She's like, I probably should have gone back and done the movie. But I don't think Chris, as a final girl, Chris Higgins holds a candle to either Alice or Ginny. Like, tell me one memorable trait about her.
There is none.
Well, I thought she was actually pretty restored. Like, I liked, like, you know, when she went around and got the log and like hid by the door and like took him out, when she threw the books down on him. Like, she used her environment in a really cool way, I thought. Like climbing up on the rafter in the barn, although she fell off, and of course she twists the damn ankle when she's running. But, you know, I thought she was pretty resourceful in terms of final girl stuff.
Yeah,
I always like that about Chris.
Yeah, though I do agree that I feel like her actual character was a bit lacking, because, you know, there was her backstory and weird trauma with Crystal Lake, and again, that story doesn't really add up. And also her relationship with Rick, which just didn't really feel quite right.
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, I did. Although she definitely came through in the climax of the movie, but just wasn't a standout.
Well, and I think, I don't know about you guys, but like in my sort of philosophy of it, like, I think in terms of the storyline, like she actually killed Jason. I think she was the one that killed him, and in 4 he's basically like in zombie mode, which I think he is for the rest of the series. But I think like Chris is the one who actually killed Jason.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can see that. I do have to ask you guys. I mean, it's kind of not off topic because it's part 3, but whose eyeball is that? I've always thought it was Paul's, because you never see Paul at the end.
Which eyeball?
When the guy that holds the eyeball up.
Yeah. Oh, right, the crazy Willie stand-in. Crazy Ralph. Whoops.
Yeah.
The crazy Ralph stand-in. I don't know. Like, I assumed it was either Harold or Edna's. You know, because it was just after the prologue. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It could have been anyone from part 2.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. Like, I feel like there's always not always, but most of the time there's a crazy Ralph stand-in after he got it in part 2.
And no one can measure up to the original.
No, not at all. But I think close second is the kind of groundskeeper in part 6.
Yeah,
I love that dude.
Yeah, no, he's pretty cool. And although
killed by his own vices.
Yeah. I was going to say, despite the movie, I do have a soft spot for the crazy sailor from Jason Takes Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just because it kind of comes out of nowhere, and it kind of combines nautical tropes with, like, the sailor who foresees doom for the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting, especially in the later films, they go from where I think part 3 is a really good film with, like, a few problems. The later films, I think, are like there are a lot of problems with a few good moments.
Right.
Especially Jason Takes Manhattan. There's stuff I appreciate. There's stuff I appreciate about that movie, but at the same time, god damn. Like I Scream Magazine asked me to write a retrospective on Jason Takes Manhattan, and I was just like, shit. I don't know if people are gonna hate it just because I didn't really have much to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I guess you could get to Manhattan from a lake. Like, I don't know how that works, but
there's so little of that movie that that's gonna be a.
Back on part 3,
Mm-hmm.
I also have to find that the unmasking in 3 is one of my favorites in the Friday the 13th franchise.
Yeah, it's great.
Because you got Chris on the canoe in the lake. It seems like everything's fine. The sun's up, and then she sees Jason without the mask and his head all bloody. Kind of pursuing her, and it's very brief. Rewatching it, I realize you don't really see him too long. It doesn't focus on him too much, but when you do, it is genuinely scary because he's doesn't have the red hair anymore, but his head's all kind of bulbous. He's got those big bulging eyes, and he's just like snarling and
clawing at the glass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's I think the scariest part of the movie for me, and how he runs when he bursts through the door. Yep. That whole little sequence there was really scary.
Something very feral about it.
The look of Jason in 3, there were like multiple people that worked on that one, right?
Stan Winston did some of the initial work on it, and then had to bow out. And I think it was Doug White that ended up with the final kind of sculpting of the Jason head. The word he got from above, like Frank Mancuso and the producers, was basically throw the look of part 2 out the window and do something more akin to what Tom Savini had done just as an adult. So I think that if you see the look from 1 to 3 to 4, it makes a lot more sense overall, with 2 being the outlier. But Doug White says basically the big thing was, he's like, get rid of the hair. And I think that especially with the hockey mask, like, it wouldn't, I think we see in Freddy versus Jason, there are those kind of wisps of hair, and it just looks really odd with the hockey mask. It doesn't work. I do like, you mentioned the reveal of the face in part 3, Jacob. There's a moment before that I really love, where when Jason is he's hung from the beam, Chris is going to leave the barn, and he lifts up his mask to show who he is, and she recognizes him. And I just think that's like one moment with Jason I really love, where he's kind of like, he's toying with her. He knows who she is, and now he's going to fuck with her a little bit, and you can see how badly that unnerves her. I think that's a great little moment in the movie.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think about that, but yeah, it is one of those rare instances where Jason was a bit more calculated in terrorizing his victims. And back what Joe was saying, like I do love the way he's taken out with, that the axe to the head, and then that one final scare where he's like, and like with the hands coming at the screen, which in 3D was actually pretty cool.
I bet. Yeah,
and
that whole sequence in 3 where Jason is kind of more calculative, I feel like that's something that was a really good start for the character, because that's the jumping point for the rest of the series where Jason actually gets enjoyment, like fucking with his prey, like part 4 where, Crispin Glover is like nailed to the door. Like this from here on, this is where Jason like actually likes to set up his victims in a way that previously it was more like Michael Myers liked to do. So I always felt like Michael Myers liked to prank the people before, and like Jason, I think from I think the end of 3 on, Jason kind of has that kind of trait too, as far as, I'm going to stalk these people, I'm going to scare them, and then I'm going to use their bodies after I kill them. I'm going to throw Rob through a fucking window.
Right. He's going to disorient his victims to get another, almost like a psychological edge on them.
Yeah. No, most definitely. And I for the small little gripes I have with 3, I feel like there are so many just really good moments like that.
And let me ask you, what did you think of back on the? I guess it was kind of a dream sequence scare, but the whole bit with zombie Pamela Voorhees jumping at Chris.
See, I think that the series relied so much on that kind of like, oh, everything's fine, and then it's not from the first and the second movie, that I feel like it was just kind of put out there, and I don't feel like it delivers like the first 2 movies do.
I jumped in. You finished up your thought, man. My bad.
I really wasn't going to say anything important. I was just going to say, like, I really like the kind of the shot that they didn't put in the movie where, was it like Chris got her head cut off, I believe?
Whoa.
Did you guys ever see that?
Oh, no. I read about that, where she wasn't going to survive.
Yeah, I think they have stills from it in the Crystal Lake Memories book. Like, I'll have to check it out and see. But yeah, there's a shot of like, I think Jason holding her head or something like that.
Right. I think it works when combined with what Joe talked about, that scene, and Jacob talked about, the scene in the window with Jason peering out and kind of like giddy at the prospect of letting her know that he's still out there, and then he comes bolting and barreling towards her. I think it works in that context because once he disappears and you think, okay, that was our scare, and then Miss Voorhees pops out, like it ends up as a scene, it's total, it works. But just like Pamela jumping out of the lake, it's kind of like you said, Jerry, it's been done already enough times.
Yeah. Well, that, and I mean, the series liked to do that, like even after the third movie. I mean, there's a few of them, a couple of them that they try to do that still. I mean, the end of 5 where it's kind of, or end of 4 and 5 where it's kind of set up that, Tommy is going to be the one. I don't know. I think the whole like bait and switch or the kind of shock of the first 2 movies that's so strong that they were just never able to recapture that lightning in a bottle.
Right. Yeah. I do love the very end of the movie when you see Chris in the back of the police vehicle and she is basically Marilyn Burns at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like her mind is snapped. You realize there's no, like, she might have survived, but there's no coming back from this. I think it has to be a nod to Tobe Hooper in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's done really well, and it's creepy. I mean, it's really creepy.
I feel like when films, especially horror films, kind of address PTSD, it's either really well, it's done really good, or really bad. Like that's one of the reasons I just adore the hell out of last year's Halloween. Because that is the continuation of Laurie Strode that I wanted but didn't get with H2O. Somebody who isn't running away from their trauma but running towards it. Right. I love that. Whereas like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, like, okay, I get that surviving something like that will be traumatic, but growing dreadlocks having a Charles Manson poster and just like cussing every other word, like
Mhm.
I didn't feel sorry for that Laurie
Right.
in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Like I was kind of annoyed by her, you know?
Yeah, you wanted to follow Annie in that movie and not Laurie.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely.
So what else do we have to say, gentlemen? Where do we stand on Friday the 13th Part 3? Is there anything I'm missing here?
No, I think it's a great movie. I think that, like I said at the beginning, you know, it's not the best in the series, but I also feel like I do feel like it's one of the most important films in the series because, you know, like I said, we could have had any mask. They could have used anything, but somebody, they all argue who it was, somebody put the hockey mask in there. You know, whether it's Larry Zerner, whether it's Frank Mancuso, whether it's everyone and their mom came up with the idea, I guess. But the fact that they did, and it was such a throwaway decision, you know what I mean? Like, it was such a small decision, like, oh, let's just put a hockey mask in there. It is so iconic. Like, my kids know the hockey mask more than they know the idea of, like, Jesus or these other figures. No, like, I'm serious. Like, I'll ask, like, because we're not a religious family, kind of the opposite. But, like, my kids, they came up to me once, they were like, Dad, who's this Jesus guy? Like, you know, kids were talking about. I'm like, I don't know. And then they were like, but my son Dexter can tell you every single look of every single Friday the 13th mask or Halloween mask. Yeah. Like he has gripes about, well, you know, I think Michael Myers looks French in part 5. That's weird. Or and he's like 10. You know, like, but the hockey mask is so iconic. It's an American staple at this point. I mean, it's used on Simpsons. It's used on In Living Color, an episode. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, such a small decision in part 3 led to basically the visual aspect of one of the best characters of all time. So I have nothing but props for Friday the 13th part 3.
I don't know if you would have gotten to a part 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 without that. It became such a part of the iconography. It's one of my favorite horror shirts is the What Would Jason Do shirt. It's WW Hockey Mask D. You know, well, that's how recognizable it is.
Even from a design aspect, the first 3 films were kind of these kind of art painting, kind of artwork things. And from 4 on, it's front and center, the hockey mask, because that is what the series is after that. It's Jason. It's Jason on display. And I feel like, thanks to Shelley, God bless him, I will fight for that guy's honor till the end.
Because of that, people that haven't seen Friday the 13th, like, get the hockey mask reference, right? Like with Jerry, same. You know, my son is in middle school and discovered scary movies, and so he said, "All right, you know, knuckle snap, like, let's go through this." And you know, there's a way you do this, and so I've been walking him through stuff, and he loves them. He can identify all the Jasons, but Friday the 13th, like part 3, is his favorite as well. It's been really fun watching it through his eyes and kind of remembering that love. Like I said, 2 is my favorite, I think, of all of them, but 3 was my favorite when I was younger for a really long time. And there's cheese in there, but there's some great scenes, and it's super fun, and it really, I do think it kind of set the tone for the series there.
Well, that and I don't feel like Richard Brooker gets enough credit. I mean, rest in peace. I feel like his Jason, it was so nuanced in a way that maybe part 2's wasn't. I love part 2 a lot, but there was this kind of scrappy, kind of finding your sea bearings kind of approach to 2. Whereas 3, I feel like Brooker kind of had a clear idea of what he wanted to do. I mean, obviously Miner was kind of a little too preoccupied with the 3D aspects to really talk to the actors much. But I feel like Richard Brooker, I feel like just clicked for him. And I feel like that is a jumping point for the whole series. You go from Richard Brooker to Ted White, which is just, oh my God, that guy is great. To, I mean, after that, you get all these great takes on Jason. And I feel like Richard Brooker's take on Jason is what kind of started that.
And let me ask you this. Do you think the hockey mask is more associated with Jason or hockey nowadays?
Jason.
Jason. Yeah, because that mask is no longer used, so absolutely. You see that style mask and you're thinking Jason.
Yeah, it's true. If you actually saw a hockey player wearing that, like, why is he
if they rebooted if they rebooted Friday the 13th now and did like a modern goalie mask, it probably wouldn't be quite as iconic.
Yeah, it wouldn't quite be the same.
After this episode ends, I have a brief interview with Larry Zerner on here, and I ask the question, like, what if you gave him something different than a hockey mask? What do you think? And the question was a little bit ridiculous. I won't spoil what I asked, what it was. But it was, he was like, well, we wouldn't have a part 4. Like, basically, it would have been a 3-movie series. And I do think that without the mask, like, this would have been a fun slasher movie series that we remembered fondly, but it doesn't have that kind of like overly passionate fan base, and we're not really talking about it. And really, like, there's like 2 more fan films that are coming out later this year that are trying to keep the series going. The video game that has been like a really fun game to play, although like playing as Jason I'm terrible at it. Like basically, if I'm ever Jason in that game, it's like everybody gets away alive. But it's like we wouldn't have that without the hockey mask. I think that's what really, really pulled the character together.
Well, that's what people kind of latch onto. I mean, my son, he didn't care about his birthday or Christmas the year that the game came out. He just wanted to see that new mask that Tom Savini made for the game. Like that was his birthday present, just to see what that would look like.
Very cool.
It's like it's wonderful. It's iconic, and like I said, I love it.
So. Jake, I think that pretty much wraps up our talk on Friday 3, unless I'm missing something.
I'm good.
Jacob, where can we find your writing and your work online?
You can find my writing and stuff at ihorror.com. That is I with the letter I, horror.com. I also co-host a podcast for iHorror called Eye on Horror. So definitely check that out. That's I as in EYE on horror. And that'll be on ihorror.com.
And do you guys, is it news, like when you do your podcast, do you focus on like upcoming horror news? Do you break down newer or classic movies? Like what's the premise of the cast?
We basically talk about what we've seen, what's out lately, and I do a segment called Subgenre of the Week where I pick a random horror subgenre because there are so many horror subgenres to discuss. And then we usually discuss a main topic, either relating to something present or anniversary related or, something newsworthy, and, just kind of go from there. And my co-host...
I don't mean to interrupt you. Just a quick question: are you gonna approach the Godzilla marathon that you recently saw?
Oh yes, no, I'll definitely be talking about that on the next episode.
Okay. So what's the Godzilla marathon for our listeners?
The Egyptian Theater, speaking of that again, had a 6 Godzilla movie marathon last Saturday with the new one coming up. And it was a blast. We watched the original one and a bunch from the 60s and 70s. I was there the whole time. It was a blast.
When they did the original, did they do the American version or the Japanese?
It was the Japanese version. It was a 4K DCP from Criterion.
Oh God.
Yeah, man, the original is still so brutal and grim.
Dark, yeah.
So it really is. And Joe, tell us about your site. Tell us about, is it Be a Hero or better?
BeHeroes.net.
BeHeroes.net. Tell us about that site, because this was an interesting. I'm kind of pouring through it as a fellow therapist. I'm like, ooh, I need to bookmark this and look at it.
Yeah, I'm the odd man out here. I'm not like in the horror film community. I'm just like a huge fan. But I've always liked metaphor. I still read comics, and there's something about horror movies, like the good versus evil thing that just especially in slasher movies, I think has really been important to me. But I am a therapist by trade, and so I do work mostly with parents for adolescents around like sex education and tech education. So all the ways that like sex and technology get mixed up together is kind of my wheelhouse. And so, that's kind of what I mostly do, travel around and give talks to parents about social media and cyberbullying and sexting, that kind of stuff.
So what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions or fears that parents have around like technology and sex education are overall? Like, what do you kind of run into?
Mostly that things are so different now than they were like when we were our kids' age, and they're not. Like they have screens now, but they're doing all the same stuff we did. They're thinking about all the same things we did, feeling all the same things we did. They're just doing it all with their screens instead of face to face.
And your podcast is called App-ropriate. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah.
So tell us about that. I know there's a couple new episodes up there, and I take it that it's like a mix of like parental advice around technology and sex and what's appropriate or inappropriate to look at with your kids or discuss with your kids. Like, what is the basis of the cast?
The basis of the cast is kind of breaking down like the good, the bad, and the ugly of specific social media sites or apps. So, you know, like this is what Twitter is. This is how Twitter works. This is good stuff, bad stuff. If your kid's going to be on Twitter, these are things you should know how to handle it. So each episode they're short and sweet, and just kind of each episode covers a different social media app to kind of give parents some topics to talk about, things to think about, and then a way to kind of wade into the pool if you're not a Snapchat person.
Right.
How do you deal with Snapchat if you have a teenager at home? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Interesting. That's definitely like working in the school for the past year, like as an intern, like especially kids in social media, they're so far ahead of my generation at this point that it's, maybe it's hard to play catch up sometimes in terms of what they know and what they're doing at this point. So we want to thank our listeners once again for tuning into us. It's been a really fun discussion. We'll be back next week with Friday the 13th, part 4, the quote unquote final chapter. Nope. Right. No truth in advertising there. You can find us on Twitter at Pod and Pendulum over in twitter.com. Drop us a line at Gmail at podandthependulum@gmail.com with your questions and favorite Friday the 13th moments. Also, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate everyone that's dropped us a line on Twitter and online that has helped spread the word. One thing you can do for us that is easy and takes maybe a minute, go over to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcast and leave us a quick review, especially a 5-star review. That helps new listeners find us. So if you can take a moment to do that, that would be great. Jerry, any final words before we go?
Also, I just want to stress the importance of supporting people of all podcasts. I mean, both of these guys host really great podcasts. If you like ours and you like what they had to say, please, by all means, go rate, download, subscribe to theirs as well. I feel like sometimes, and I've experienced this recently, I feel like sometimes podcasts are kind of put against each other. Like when we announced that we were going to do the Friday the 13th one, there was people being like, well, this is the best one. No, this is the best one. It shouldn't be like that. We could all coexist. And I feel like especially in the horror community, there's a lot of competition when there doesn't need to be.
Right.
And like both of these guys, like I said, they both have great podcasts. I've actually listened to both of their podcasts.
Thank you.
If you like ours, or even if you don't like ours, go subscribe, go rate theirs, help everybody out.
I was fortunate this week. I put a question out there into Twitter like, hey, I'm looking for more podcasts, horror movie related and just movie related. And I was looking for ones with a feminist slant, with more persons of color that appear, and with more LGBT representation as well. Because right now I'm looking at our screen and we're 4 white men. And, it's just kind of there's a lot of us out there, and our points of view get heard a lot. And I'm I just wanted to kind of broaden my listening a bit, and was really fortunate to get at least 24 new podcasts to kind of add and check out, and a number of them have been great. So one of the things we're trying to do each week on Twitter is just kind of just spotlight here's what we're listening to right now, and post links to it and give a shout out to, because I think it's the horror movie community is the best community that's out there with so many good people. So we kind of want to spread some love and share the wealth a little bit. So until next week, thanks very much, guys. Have a fantastic week. Thanks for listening, and try not to get murdered by a hockey mask wearing psychopath out there. All right. That's an episode.